My family refused to help me with my business to invest in my cousin, but now that he failed and my business is successful, I call my company a family business. I am Zakir, 34 years old, a man, and I grew up in a successful family that lived comfortably. My father had several businesses around the city, like real estate, retail, and a few others. My mother owns several buildings, yes, in the plural. My grandparents, although not as wealthy, were the first entrepreneurs who managed to gather enough to give my parents an initial push. There is an expectation that if you're born into this family or inherit something and don't ruin it or start your own empire, you'll naturally go for the latter. I wasn't a naive boy dreaming of opening a hut on a beach in the Bahamas. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I had a plan, a solid one in my opinion. Cybersecurity. Since I was 14 and accidentally hacked my school's server to change my detention record, I discovered that I had a talent for computers. I went to university, graduated in computer science, and spent hours obsessed with cryptography, data leaks, and programming. After I graduated, I realized that cybersecurity is not only an interesting career, it's also lucrative. Every company needs it. All banks, all hospitals. It's like selling umbrellas in a world where data leaks are always raining. I had a vision, a potential customer base, and a detailed business plan that I believed would impress anyone. But here's the problem. I needed money to start, a lot of money. I wasn't asking for millions, okay? Just enough to rent office space, hire a small team, and invest in initial software and hardware. I could have started with less, sure, but I had this very clear image of how the company would look. One morning, I approached my parents. We were sitting in the living room, and I presented my idea. I had charts, market research, and passion. I asked for a loan. I didn't want a gift. I didn't want free money. It was about a loan I would pay back with interest once the business took off. They said, "Zach, we love you, but we don't think you have what it takes to run a business." They didn't say this cruelly. My dad sighed as he said it, as if it physically hurt him to reject me. My mom gave me one of those pitying looks moms give when they think you're being adorably naive. My dad explained that being a good programmer doesn't automatically make you a good entrepreneur. Running a business means, well, running it. Managing accounts, employees, investors, losses. All those boring and not fun parts. And, according to them, I simply didn't have that spark. For them, investing in me wasn't investing. It was throwing money away. I won't lie, that hurt. At first, I was angry, very angry, but I still didn't want to give up on my dream. A month after my parents rejected my funding request, my cousin Bernard was getting married. A big, luxurious wedding, 3 days of events, champagne fountains, the whole spectacle. At one point, I was standing with my parents near the buffet table when Bernard came over. He greeted my parents, shook my dad's hand, and then said, "Uncle and Aunt, thank you again for believing in me and helping me with the funds for my hotel business. I couldn't have done it without you." I stood there looking at Bernard like he had just confessed to being a time traveler. My parents laughed nervously, said something polite, and quickly changed the subject. I had asked for funding, they said no, but Bernard got funding for a hotel, a damn hotel. I left with some lame excuse because I felt betrayed. Not because of funding Bernard. I mean, good for him, I guess. But why wouldn't they do the same for me? They trusted Bernard, but not me, their own son. Apparently, I wasn't worth the risk. At some point, my grandmother found me sitting there. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you inside enjoying the wedding?" And there's something about grandmothers, you just can't lie to them. You simply can't. So I told her everything. She just let me vent, then said something I'll never forget. "Zakir, sometimes people see potential in others because they see a younger version of themselves in them. It's possible that your dad sees a younger version of himself in Bernard. But that doesn't mean you're not capable. You're different, and being different isn't bad. It's just different." She squeezed my hand and added, "You're smart, hardworking. One day you'll build something amazing, but it will be on your own terms." I know it sounds like a bunch of cliches, but it was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. The day after the wedding, I was still in this strange emotional fog, half motivated by what my grandmother said, but also half devastated. I was sitting on my sofa when my phone rang. It was my grandfather. Now, my grandfather is not the type of person to call just for a chat. So naturally, I got startled. I asked if everything was okay, and he said yes, he just wanted me to come see him. I said, "Okay, Grandpa, I'll be there in 2 hours." When I arrived at his house, my grandmother opened the door and gave me a warm smile. "Come in, Zakir. Your grandfather is in the office." He was sitting in his chair when I entered, but immediately stood up and hugged me. And at that moment, I started to relax a bit. My grandfather didn't waste time with small talk. He said, "Your grandmother told me what happened at the wedding and how you feel about your business plans." "Oh, so that's what it was about." I nodded, trying to keep a neutral expression. He continued, "I want you to know something. I started my first business with nothing but an old van and a loan from my uncle. It wasn't easy, and everyone thought I was going to fail, but I didn't. And do you know why?" I shook my head. Because someone believed in me. Sometimes, just one person can make all the difference. Then, he reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a checkbook, wrote something, and handed it to me. Now, I'm not going to tell you the exact amount, but let's just say it wasn't pocket money. It wasn't all I needed to launch my cybersecurity company, but it was enough to start, enough to make a real difference. I stared at the check for what seemed like 5 whole minutes. Finally, I managed to say, "Grandpa, I don't know what to say." He said, "You don't need to say anything. This isn't just money, it's trust. I'm investing in you." I was trying with all my might not to lose my composure, but my grandfather simply stood up, walked over, hugged me, and said, "Make us proud." On the way back home, I kept looking at the check. It wasn't just money, it was proof that someone believed in me. After getting the initial funding from my grandfather, I knew I had to be smart with every penny. I didn't spend it on fancy desks or modern office chairs. We started small. I contacted my 2 best friends, Adam and Louie. We pooled the little we had saved and rented a tiny, cramped office in the most dangerous part of town. But hey, it was ours. Those first 2 years were brutal. We worked between 14 and 16 hours a day, barely rested on weekends, and I survived on instant noodles and vending machine snacks. Louis made call after call, Adam was buried in code, and I did everything at once. Our first big client was a medium-sized financial company that had just been hacked. We managed to fix their systems, recover their data, and prevent future breaches. This project gave us enough money to move into a slightly better office. Slowly but surely, we started to gain traction. Word of mouth started to spread, and we began landing bigger clients. About 4 years later, we reached our first milestone. We had enough revenue to consider expanding. We opened our second office in a neighboring city, and a year later, we opened a third in another major city. By then, we were no longer just a makeshift startup, we were a real company. Around that time, we also started a cybersecurity consulting business. Seemed like the next natural step. Companies weren't just asking us to fix the breaches, but also wanted us to proactively prevent them. And let me tell you, consulting money tastes different. About 5 years after starting the business, I was finally in a position to pay my grandparents back. I drove to their house, check in hand, and said, "This is for you, with interest." But I didn't stop there. These 2 people gave me everything when no one else did, so I bought them a new house. Nothing ridiculously extravagant, but cozy, comfortable, in a neighborhood they'd always loved. Seeing them walk through their new home, pointing out little details they liked, was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. While our cybersecurity business thrived, Bernard's hotel, the pandemic completely crushed the hotel industry, and Bernard's hotel never fully recovered. Apparently, my parents gave him even more money to help, but despite their efforts, and I honestly feel bad for him, the hotel eventually closed. So, last weekend, we were celebrating my grandparents' 5th wedding anniversary because they are literally the reason I have everything I have today. I wanted to make sure I kept thanking them for what they did. I didn't skimp on anything. I rented a beautiful hotel ballroom, hired a caterer, arranged for a live band, and invited basically all their friends, family, and even some old neighbors they hadn't seen in years. Honestly, planning this event was more exciting than some of the biggest deals I've ever closed. The party was spectacular. Everyone was dressed elegantly, the food was amazing, and my grandparents were so happy, which is what mattered. But then my parents came into the picture. At some point during the night, I overheard my dad talking to one of his old friends. When the friend said he must be proud of me, he replied talking about family values and how his support and guidance put me on the right path. He also mentioned, and I didn't hear wrong, that it's practically a family business now. Excuse me, as the night went on, I kept hearing fragments of conversations where my parents painted themselves as the backbone of We always knew he would do something great. We supported him every step of the way. That's what we do as a family. We lift each other up. And the kicker, my dad said, all thanks to the initial support from family. Look, I'm not saying I needed my parents to kneel before me or apologize with tears in their eyes, or anything like that, but they were taking credit for something they actively refused to support. That didn't sit well with me. I tried to enjoy the rest of the night, but I was really angry. So, I changed my speech. Originally, I had planned something simple, a sincere tribute to Grandma and Grandpa, but after everything I heard that night, I knew I couldn't let it pass. I started with a light tone, cracked some jokes, mentioned how their marriage was older than the internet, and talked about the love and respect they've always shown each other. But then I got serious, and here's the main part of my speech. Look, Grandma and Grandpa didn't just build a life together. They built a legacy of love, trust, and, most importantly, faith in people. When I had a dream and everyone else slammed the door in my face, they opened it. They didn't just believe in my idea, they believed in me. And everything I have today, I owe to their faith in me when no one else had it. I paused. My parents were looking at me with frozen smiles on their faces. So tonight, I want to propose a toast to Grandma and Grandpa, the only two people who believed in me when no one else did. This success is theirs and no one else's. Grandma was crying. Grandpa nodded with that proud, calm smile he has, and my parents smiled stiffly, with clenched teeth. About 15 minutes after the speech, my dad found me near the dessert table. He was basically shouting at me, "What the hell was that speech? Were you trying to humiliate us in front of everyone?" I replied, "Humiliate you? I just told the truth. You didn't believe in me, but Grandma and Grandpa did." My mom joined the discussion. "You didn't have to air the family's problems in front of everyone. You made us look really bad." By that point, I was biting my tongue, trying not to explode, but then my dad said, "You act like we didn't do anything for you. We gave you a good life, a good education. How dare you make us look like the villains in your little success story?" At first, I didn't shout, but my voice definitely rose in pitch. "You know what? You didn't believe in me. You had the money, but you gave it to Bernard for his hotel without thinking twice. And when he failed, you gave him even more. But when I came to you with my idea, you told me I wasn't the business type." At that moment, I realized the hall had gone completely silent. The guests were watching. My cousin Bernard, the one with the failed hotel, was uncomfortably drinking in a corner, as if he wanted to disappear. My dad pointed his finger at me. "You're being ungrateful." And I responded, completely losing control. "Ungrateful? I'm not ungrateful. I'm just saying out loud what everyone already knows." My chest was tight. My face was hot. I realized I had just caused a scene at what was supposed to be a celebration for my grandparents. I looked around and saw my grandmother looking at me with a soft and sad expression. Not disappointed, just sad. My grandfather had his arm around her, as if trying to calm her. That's when guilt hit me. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, walked out of the ballroom, and didn't even grab my coat. I got in my car, slammed the door, and sat there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to calm down. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the argument over and over in my head. The next morning, I received a message from my grandmother. "Zakir, we love you very much. Please don't feel bad about what happened last night. We understand you, but that really didn't make me feel any better." I thought a lot about it. Did I overreact? Did I ruin a night that should have been for my grandparents? I think it's fair to give you all an update. because you were so kind to comment on my post. I thought things had calmed down after that night. I thought maybe everyone would reflect a bit and then we'd have an adult and appropriate conversation. But no. My parents decided to go for the nuclear option. It started small. A cousin texted me, something like, "Hey, Isaac, is it true that you manipulated grandma and grandpa to give you money? Is that what uncle is saying?" At first, I laughed because, come on, it sounded ridiculous. But then the calls kept coming. An aunt messaged me on Facebook saying she was disappointed in the way I used my grandparents' emotions to get money from them. So, I called my grandma immediately because I needed to know if she was okay. She said, "Don't worry about what others say, we know the truth, and that's the only thing that matters." Honestly, she is the sweetest woman in the world, and hearing her voice calmed me a bit. But I couldn't ignore the fact that my parents were out there creating a twisted narrative. I'm not someone who likes confrontation, despite what my meltdown at the birthday party might suggest. But this time, I couldn't let it slide. I called my parents and asked, "What the hell are you telling everyone? Why are people calling me saying I manipulated grandma and grandpa?" To that, my mom replied, "Well, you cried with them. You made them feel sorry for you. That's manipulation." I said, "I wasn't crying with them. I was telling them my situation. That's called having emotions." I heard my dad in the background. "You can interpret it however you want, but everyone sees you for what you really are now." I said, "All right, fine. Say whatever you want to everyone. I'm tired of trying to explain myself to you." And I hung up. I thought hanging up would give me some peace, but it didn't. During the following week, the rumors only got worse. One relative said they heard I threatened to cut ties with grandma and grandpa if they didn't give me money. Another said I bragged about how I had manipulated them and laughed about it. Then, I felt like I was losing my mind. Like, how do you fight something like that? It's so absurd that it almost seems funny, except it's not funny when people you care about start believing it. One day, my cousin Bernard, yes, that cousin, called me. He said, "Hey man, I know things are complicated right now, but do you think you could talk to uncle and aunt and sort this out?" I said, "There's nothing to sort out, Bernard. They know the truth. They're just choosing to ignore it." I texted my parents, "I can't continue with this. You made the decision to spread these lies and I can't keep trying to convince you otherwise. I'm stepping away from this relationship for now. I love you both, but I can't keep letting this hurt me." And that was it. I blocked them on social media because they were posting passive-aggressive things about me. I stopped responding to relatives who were clearly just looking for gossip. I'm in a strange place right now. If anything happens, I'll keep you updated. It's been a while. Wow, how time has passed. I wish I was coming back with better news, but life doesn't always want to give you good news. My grandfather passed away last month. The only good thing I can say about it is that he passed away in his sleep. In a way, it was peaceful, but man, it still hit me like a truck. Needless to say in this update how important he was to me, and I'm not talking about the money, but the support and example he was as a person. As soon as I got the news, I packed my bags and drove straight to my grandmother's house. She looked so small and fragile when I walked in, but she still managed to give me a weak smile and a hug. I think I've never hugged anyone so tightly in my life. Organizing the funeral was difficult, but I had to do it for my grandmother. My parents were also there, and although we were civilized, there was this strange tension in the air, like we all knew there were unresolved issues, but no one had the energy to address them. In the midst of mourning, the funeral itself was beautiful. Honestly, hundreds of people showed up. My grandfather was one of those genuinely good souls, and seeing how many lives he touched was overwhelming. Old business partners, childhood friends, neighbors. People came from everywhere to pay their respects. I tried to hold it together during the eulogy, but man, I lost my composure halfway through. My grandmother held my hand the entire time, and I'm so grateful she was there because I don't think I could have done it otherwise. Now, here is where things got a little complicated. My grandfather wasn't incredibly wealthy or anything like that, but he owned some properties, including a beautiful lakeside house. It's the kind of place you'd see on postcards. A wooden pier, large windows overlooking the water, and surrounded by trees. My dad spent a lot of time there as a child, and even I have memories of running along the pier, fishing with Grandpa, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. So, during the reading of the will, the lawyers started listing the assets, and then we got to the lake house. My grandfather left it to me and my cousin Laura. To give some context, Laura is the daughter of my dad's sister. She's honestly brilliant, someone I get along with, but the moment my dad heard the words, Zakir and Laura will share ownership of the lake house, I swear I saw him clench his jaw. He didn't say anything at that moment, but his face said it all. He was furious, like, really furious. After the reading, he left without saying a word to me. My mom followed him, and I just sat there, uncomfortable with Laura and my grandmother. In the following days, while I stayed with my grandmother, my dad completely avoided me. If we were in the same room, he acted like I was invisible. My mom gave me those half smiles, but she didn't say much either. It's amazing to me because it's not like I asked for the lake house. I didn't even know my grandfather was going to leave it to me, but somehow I felt like my dad saw this as another personal attack, as if my grandfather was picking sides in some imaginary war. Laura and I talked about it one night while having tea. She admitted that she also felt uncomfortable because her mom wasn't exactly happy with the will, but at least Laura's mom didn't act coldly. One afternoon, while helping my grandmother sort through some of Grandpa's old things, she sat down with me and said, "Your grandfather loved your father very much, but he also saw how hard you worked, how much you fought to prove yourself. He wanted you to have something that meant a lot to him." I think she knew I felt guilty about the whole situation, like I had inadvertently caused an even bigger rift between my dad and me, but my grandmother said something that stayed with me. "Your grandfather wasn't taking sides, he was choosing love. He loved you and he loved Laura. That's why he wanted both of you to have a place where you could always feel close to him." The night before I was supposed to go home, I ran into my dad in the kitchen. He was making tea, and I was filling a cup with water. For a moment, everything was silent. Neither of us said anything, but then he spoke. "You know, that lake house. It should stay in the family, it should be ours." I replied, "It still is, Dad. I'm not going to sell it. I'm not going to turn it into some property for rent. It's still ours." He didn't respond, just stirred his tea, left the spoon, and walked out. There are some things I need to sort out now, as my dad decided to sue me. He believes the lake house belongs to him, despite my grandfather leaving it to me and my cousin Laura. I can't go into too many details because everything is very, very complicated legally, but I'll try to give you an idea of what's happening. It all started when my dad began showing up at my house unannounced, demanding that I hand over the lake house. At first, I thought maybe he was just upset and wanted to talk, but when I refused to give in, he started making threats. He said my grandfather's will was wrong and that I was wrong for not sharing the house with him. It was like a switch flipped in him. Then came the legal documents. I won't go into details, but basically, my dad's team of lawyers sent me official papers accusing me of obtaining the lake house improperly and demanding that I give it up. He claims the inheritance is his, not mine, and that I manipulated my grandfather into leaving me the house. I mean, it's ridiculous. My grandfather clearly left the house to Laura and me. My mom keeps trying to mediate, trying to convince me to give in and just hand the house over to my dad so we can move past this. I'm at a point where I don't think there's any turning back. I don't think we'll ever be able to fix what's broken. I don't think you'll be hearing from me during this time, at least until everything settles down, and I can give more details about all of this. This update comes a long time after the last one, and believe me, I wish it had been sooner, precisely because that would have meant the whole legal battle with my dad would have been over by now, but it hasn't been that way. Only now can I speak freely about everything that happened. Well, my dad didn't manage to invalidate my grandfather's will and get the house, which would have been perfect for him, as I'll explain later. The lawsuit should have lasted very little, actually, but my dad had good lawyers, at least in the art of delaying things, and it dragged on longer than usual. I think he expected me to finally throw in the towel and say the house would be his, something I couldn't have done anyway because it also belongs to my cousin. But not even my aunt joined in my dad's crusade. And when my grandmother told me that my grandfather really wanted me to have the house, I couldn't give up. Luckily, my grandmother's testimony was helpful for the trial, as my dad had nothing, absolutely nothing. All he did was spend an impressive amount of money he didn't have on lawyers. But he also managed to make me spend money. But if there's anything good in everything he did to me, it's that, besides spreading his rhetoric that I had manipulated my grandfather to the family, he also expanded it to more people, to the point of having them on my side. So, we played a game of chess and sued him for defamation and damages. I don't know the value of the house my grandfather left us because we didn't have it appraised, as we don't want to sell it, but I'm sure what he lost in lawyers and what he had to pay for my lawsuit was much more expensive. Yes, we're talking about that kind of sum. And this is particularly bad for my dad because part of his obsession with my grandfather's house wasn't the memories. He wanted to make money from it. He was thinking of getting it to sell it. I mean, my grandfather's body wasn't even cold yet, and he was already arguing about the inheritance because he needed the money. The reason for this is that the money he lent to my cousin, along with the subsequent loans, left him in a delicate financial position, and the fight with me worsened it even more. Although he can't blame anyone but himself since he was the one who sought it. He could have used the money he spent on lawyers to cover the debt and still have some financial stability. My parents had to sell their house. Part of the money was used to pay for my lawsuit, and the rest to cover other debts. They were really affected financially by this bad investment. They still have my dad's business, which, as far as I know, is profitable. However, he's trying to sell a part of it to relieve some of the debts. Someone from the family suggested I buy it so the business stays in the family, but having my dad as a partner isn't one of the most tempting ideas right now. Besides, it's not an industry I like, nor one where I can contribute with my knowledge. At least I know my dad won't have the money to keep suing me for anything that crosses his mind. My dad sold a part of the business to a relative. I thought this might interest some people who asked about it.